Hi there and welcome back to the channel. This video is all about coming out on top in your engagements, winning the smaller fights on one flank or a 1v1 over a ridge or a corner. Almost all of the time you have to win these in order to win the game overall, but there are some rare cases where you losing the fight allows your team to win. This video is going to operate as both a guide and a tutorial. The first part will guide you as to what information you should keep in mind when taking your tank into a fight. You don't need to remember all of the statistics of the tank in play to succeed, but there are some general rules that will serve you well. The second part will go through examples of how you can mechanically improve your success rate in these situations. So before you even enter the battle, you've got to have some idea of what your tank is capable of. What is it good at? What is it not so good at? You can just play the tank to figure this out. You don't necessarily have to memorize all of the statistics. Although if that's how you learn, then go right ahead. Once you figure that out, you can spend some time setting up your tank with skills and equipment. I have another video that details what you need to think about in that regard, but to reiterate the main point, you want to use the equipment and skills that are best for your tank and your playstyle so you have an unfair advantage in the engagement. You're not going to win nearly as often if you give the opponents a chance to tip the scales. That's basically all you need to do and know before entering the battle. There is one more niche point I'd like to bring up though, and it concerns premium rounds. If you have a silver to drain, by all means go all in on premium ammo, but I would recommend that you check exactly what type of rounds your tank uses before premium. If your tank fires heat or high explosive anti-tank rounds as premium, be aware that while they have fantastic penetration and do well against flat armor panels, they are frustratingly bad at dealing with spaced armor, tracks and other obstacles. Again, this is a fairly niche point. An accurate gun shouldn't have problems hitting the correct parts of the tank, but for points I will talk about further on in this video, you might find that heat rounds simply aren't as good as regular armor piercing, as backwards as that sounds. So, you've set up your tank and have headed into battle. First thing, have a look at the team lists. You're not particularly interested in the composition of the teams class-wise. You can't really predict where people are going to go in their tanks. Someone might camp in the back in their heavy tank while the tank destroyers charge in and brawl. It's luck of the draw in this game. What you need to pay attention to is the tiers of the tanks, specifically whether you're top, middle or bottom tier in the game. This is the first indicator of how important you're going to be in engagements, because top tier tanks are the big players. They're the ones making the plays for better or for worse on each team. Mid and low tier tanks can also make plays, but they will typically need some backup. If you find yourselves in the mid or lower tier tanks, you should watch where your top tier allies go on the map and follow them if you think it's safe, by which I mean if it's not out in the open, you're probably fine. The second indicator for spotting a winning engagement comes within the first 30 seconds of the battle. You must watch where your teammates go on the map, especially top tier ones as we just discussed. I would highly recommend following the high value tanks on your team at the start of the battle to maximise your chance of securing a flank. The first half of every WoT tank game consists of groups of tanks slugging it out in a select number of places. You want to make the engagement unfair in the favour of your team, even if that means sacrificing a flank almost entirely. Don't be baited into, oh, my team have left this flank, I've got to go it alone to hold them off. That's not how this game works. So you've picked a flank and head with a portion of your team into the battle. You find a position and the engagement starts when enemies are spotted. It's here where I must mention probably the most important aspect of winning engagement, and that is hit points. The balance of hit points between teams in World of Tanks is what defines the engagement most of the time, and it's what creates this unique gameplay loop that World of Tanks has. In more sim-like games, such as War Thunder for example, it's entirely possible for you to kill every tank you meet with one penetrating shot. That's how it is in the real world as well. This is not the case in World of Tanks. You can pump shell after shell into the engine bay of a tank and it will still go as fast as it was at full health. It will play as if you haven't touched it. With the exception of the tracks, all of the modules and crew members are essentially indestructible and are immortal until you've exceeded the tank's hit point total. As such, this is why you'll hear YouTubers say, it isn't over till I hit 0, or I've got 1 more HP than I really need. The fact is, they're technically right. A mouse on 1 hit point operates exactly the same as a mouse on 3,000 hit points. They probably won't even have any damaged modules because of the advent of refreshing medkits and repair packs. So how does this translate into your engagements? Well, each team has committed a certain amount of hit points and firepower to each flank. Ignoring the more mechanical aspects of upsetting their balance, which I'll cover later, you'll find that tanks are destroyed at a certain rate depending on how many are shooting at it. Let's bring in an example. So, in this example, you take your tank to an engagement along with 4 allies, and after the engagement has been established, you ascertain that there are 5 opponents fighting you. For the purposes of simplicity, the tanks are of equal power and tier. It's not hard to see that this is an even fight, and the first tank on each team gets taken out within, say, 30 seconds. The fight continues roughly evenly until one side comes out victorious. Now suppose you brought 6 allies to fight the opponent's 5 tanks. Your team is now at an advantage. Instead of 30 seconds, the first tank on the enemy team dies in about 20 seconds. This does 2 things. Firstly, it decreases the enemy team's firepower, meaning it will take them longer to kill one of your tanks, and also there are 1 fewer targets for your team to shoot at, so your team puts out more condensed firepower on the remaining targets, causing them to die even quicker. It's usually the case that whoever has more units in an engagement wins, in any game and in real life, but it is especially true in World of Tanks because of these hit point pools. Outside of setting fires or getting ammo racked, the hit points provide a consistent baseline and allow you to almost mathematically determine who will win and use mechanics to tip the scales in your favour when possible. Now, with all that said, I will give you the first major tip to use when you're fighting. In the early stages of the game, look after your hit points. At the start, everyone is on full health and rushing into position. You have no idea how many guns will point at you if you make a mistake at the start, so have a little patience. The enemy team has its maximum amount of firepower at the start of the game, and you could receive multiple shots for exposing yourself even for a short time. Anyway, back to the example. This engagement has been going on for some time, and your team appears to be coming out on top, picking off tanks that have gone too far forward and getting meaty hits into backliners. After a quick scan around, you take a look at your teammates' health. They look pretty healthy, and you can quite clearly see that your team have a significant advantage in tanks and health. The engagement, wordlessly of course, puts forward the question, do you push? Knowing when to push is a difficult skill in this game. There is no rule that always works. There is no formula that you can apply that will tell you what your chances are. There are simply too many variables in play. Because World of Tanks is an RNG based game and you have no idea who is controlling the other tanks in the battle and what they might do. As such, I can't tell you how to answer the question correctly every time. However, what I can do is give you tips on reading the situation and gauging whether in each instance you can make a successful push. So before you push, you need to check that you have relevant allies that can either push with you or cover you from further back. If you're trying to round the corner of a building, you'll need 1 or 2 tanks right next to you. If you're crossing an open space, you make sure that there are teammates in position to shoot the enemies that you spot or coax out with your push. Then take a look at your health. Assume that every shot that hits you is going to penetrate and vaguely guess how long it would take the enemy tanks to kill you. It doesn't have to be precise. The main thing you need to be wary of is an auto-loading tank at this point. Once you've got that time, if you think you'll last more than about 20 seconds, you're good on that front. The last thing to do before you push is pick a position to push into. This could be the exact spot the enemy tanks are in. It could be the opposite side of the street. It could be the opposite side of a valley or hill. The point is, unless you know for certain by looking at the remaining tanks on each team list, there may be a hidden camper that will shoot at you as you move up. Guess where they're most likely to be and try and spot a position that will offer cover from them. And if you're uncertain, just go for low ground or hard cover such as rocks or the corpses of tanks you'll make with your push. So, when you decide to go, you need to make this push as effective as possible. The first thing to do is to go as soon as 1 or 2 of the enemies fire. What this does is gives you a damage advantage right at the start of the push. You fire immediately, your enemies have to wait for a reload before they can fire again. It is also important to prioritize kill shots. The less guns the enemy has, the less damage they can dish out. It might buy your allies a few more seconds of time, buying them another reload so they can shoot again. So that might allow you to win the engagement. And as soon as you've destroyed all enemies in the immediate vicinity, I cannot stress this point enough, look at your map. You might need to figure out where the next fight is that you can win. So, we've covered what to do when your team is winning. I'll now discuss what to do when you're losing the fight and the enemy team pushes you. Keeping an eye on the balance of the fight will give you signs of whether you're winning or losing. You can do this through watching the kill feed, keeping an eye on the minimap, but you can also use sound. Especially if you're wearing headphones, you can tell the direction of shots and their relative caliber. You can also tell whether the shots have bounced or penetrated through the sounds and seeing the shots themselves. You don't have to keep track of all of these, of course, just see what the bigger guns in the fight are doing. If your allies appear to be bouncing shots and the enemies aren't, you can pretty quickly tell if the fight is going to be a loss. I would suggest that once you realise you're going to lose at the current rate, you should consider your position and think about whether this is your last stand, whether you want to leave and re-engage somewhere else, or try and tip the scales of the engagement back in your favour. All three options have their own decision making, but for this video I'm going to focus on tipping the scales back at that point and, as per the title of the video, win the engagement. So you've identified that you're going to lose the engagement if you don't do something. What can you do to tip the scales back in your favour? Well, you must rebalance the hit points on each team, and the way to do that is to penetrate more shots than you take, both as an individual and as a team. To do that, you must minimise the amount of firepower the enemy can bring to bear against you and your allies. The key thing to remember here when you're in the fight is lines of sight. In these situations, especially when you're alone, you want to keep in mind where the enemies are and do everything in your power to obstruct their line of fire, or failing that, present your tank to maximise the chances that their shot will bounce through angling your armour and moving back and forth to throw off their aim. A missed or bounced shot can turn the tables of any engagement, so make sure you're ready to take advantage if it happens at any point. It's at this point I'm going to transition to the more mechanical side of winning engagements, and I'll kick off with an example of what I'm trying to explain. So here is a replay I wanted to use as an example to try and get the point across in a more realistic sense and how this kind of thing unfolds in battle. You see here there are 5 of us currently holding the northern end of the Pilsen map. It is an encounter battle. The flag is in the central warehouse in the middle of the map, and the enemy will push in this replay. I want to show how both my behaviour and specifically the behaviour of the Object 2685 just to the left of me allowed us to come out on top. Initially I intended on going up to the right, but I was stopped in my tracks by a dragon that dealt over 500 damage in a single shot to me. And then you can see there the Object 705A not looking at me, but could very easily twist its tank just at 90 degrees to the right and plant another 650 damage into the side of me. Now you see on the left 2 of the friendly tanks go down, and the third one, that Object 260, is now on 200 health, a one-shot for anyone on their team. And you see a Centurion Action 10 now is also holding this corridor, this central corridor, so I can't move forward. But you see I'm keeping low and only exposing my tank when I'm loaded, minimize so they can't shoot me and take advantage of my long reload that I have in this Revelry zone. Now the 260 goes down and here comes the push. There are 2 tier 8 mediums which aren't very powerful tanks, but they've brought with them an Object 279E. Now watch this 2685 player. He is pretty sure he's going to die, but with his final breath he plants a shot into the side of the 279E, allowing me to finish him off. Now if that tier 10 heavy came towards me after killing the 2685, I'd have no chance of penning it, but thankfully brought it into a one-shot range. And you see he ignores the stone cold that flanks him and only exposes himself to the AMX 5100, allowing him enough time to get a reload off. You see here now the rest of the tanks that were on that corridor now push forward. I made a mistake trying to kill the T-28 prototype. It didn't pay off, but at least I didn't die for it. It doesn't matter anyway, the T-28 prototype has a rush of bloodlust and succumbs to his runes. And then an extra little tidbit here. The 2 tanks remaining on the enemy team. I know there's no backup because on the top there's only 2 of them left. I'm waiting for both of them to fire. So when they both fire, they're on a reload. That allows me at least 5 or 6 seconds of free time to get an aim and get a free shot off. And that's kind of what I'm talking about. So this is another angle of this push made by the enemy. The Stone Cold unloads its salvo. Here comes the 279E around the corner. 2685 turns to face him, puts a shell into his turret front, and I come in with a premium round and kill it in the side. Now look what the 265 has done with the 279E's hull. It's using it to block fire from the AMX 5100 in the top left corner of the screen, which means that the number of guns focusing on him is only 1, the Stone Cold, and it has the 2685 has enough health to take a salvo from the Stone Cold. If he hadn't used that corpse and driven around it to get a shot off earlier, the AMX 5100 would probably have the penetration to just go through the hull of the 2685 and kill it immediately. But because he used the corpse of the 279E, he allowed himself to buy about 5 seconds of time, allowed me to kill the Stone Cold, bought him enough time to reload, kill the 5100. So instead of losing him for nothing, he managed to sacrifice himself for 2 tanks. While I think that clip illustrates my point quite well, I understand that that's not the only situation you'll find yourself in. There is a distinct chance you will be pushed on your own by multiple enemy tanks, and I would say that the overall strategy remains the same. You want to minimize the amount of fire coming towards you and maximize your fire output, but you can't generate crossfires with friendly tanks that don't exist because they're either dead or didn't come with you in the first place. My main tip for if you're alone against multiple enemies in close quarters, try and expose yourself to 1 tank when you fire. So peek out, pick a tank, ideally pick one that's on low health that you can kill, but only expose yourself to the minimum amount of tanks, 1 or 2, as you shoot, because then that saves your health so you can peek out a little bit more, grind them down as they push towards you. The way this game works is tanks that push are obviously moving, turning their turrets a lot more than the defenders, so they will have a disadvantage accuracy-wise. They are more likely to miss. So I would suggest that you don't be afraid to peek out and take a chancy shot at a tank that's on the move. It's less likely than usual that they will hit a shot in return, but don't be surprised if they still manage to do it on the move and get a good snapshot. That's just how the game works. It's an RNG based accuracy mechanic. Sometimes you're just going to get unlucky, but you need to take those chancy shots if you're outnumbered, because if you don't, they're just going to get closer, all pile in on you, and then you have literally no chance of winning that. A tip that spans over all of the engagement types talked about in this video is to go for tracking shots whenever possible. Ideally, you want to shoot through an enemy's track into their hull, immobilizing them and doing damage. Immobilizing your enemies provides you with more time, either to fall back or catch up with retreating enemies. Often the enemy will use their repair pack to fix the tracks as soon as possible, so if you can get 2 tracking shots in a row or score a critical hit on another module with your next shot, it will be significantly damaged for a long period of time. I will mention, however, a point I alluded to earlier in the video. Heat rounds, a type of premium round, do not penetrate the armour of the tank through the tracks, so you will lose a lot of damage output. You will fire a shot, possibly not even track them, it could just damage the tracks, but you will definitely do 0 damage. And if you're in a 1 versus 1 fight, that can really hurt you. So just be aware of the type of round you are capable of firing and are currently loaded in the tank. To that end, I would also suggest you use your tracks as part of your armor profile. When you're advancing straight towards an enemy, I would suggest you don't advance in a straight line and employ small turns as you move forwards, so your tracks are in the position where your lower plate was. So if an enemy was aiming at your lower plate, you suddenly turn in, you only get tracked instead of taking the damage. And with a repair kit, you can instantly repair it and carry on, and you've bought roughly 5 to 10 seconds of free advancement time. Another tip I suggest you take on board is an adaptation of the tip I gave in the when to push section of the video. It's timing reloads. You don't necessarily have to learn the statistical reload of every tank so you know exactly how fast their gun fires. I would say it's very difficult to do that because of commander skills, equipment, premium consumables, things like that. Within the same tank, reload times can vary significantly. So I would suggest on the corner, when you're in the middle of an engagement, when an enemy fires, poke out, take a well-aimed shot, pull back. It's unlikely they would be able to reload in time to shoot you again unless you take a particularly long amount of time. I would say though, be aware of unspotted campers at the back and supporting tanks that may have a shot on you when you do this. And on the flip side, if you happen to be one of those supporting tanks, wait to see if an enemy does this. It is a fairly obvious skill. A lot of people do it, but their execution of it varies. They could just drive out into the open to get a shot off on your friendly tank that has just fired. So be aware that the enemy will use this tactic as well. In a slightly different respect, but still on the same subject, if you're struggling to determine how fast an enemy reloads, either in a 1v1 situation or when you're up against multiple tanks and you don't know exactly when to poke, or you're worried that if you poke and shoot, the enemy will be reloaded in time when you're pulling back to get back into cover and just shoot you in the tracks and immobilize you out in the open, I would suggest that you apply a simple rule of thumb. If the enemy tank fires and you notice it does more damage per shot than your gun, assume it's going to reload slower. So, for example, at tier 10, if you're up against a tank destroyer that has 750 alpha damage, and you're in a medium tank that has 390 alpha damage, you can safely assume that your gun will reload quicker. So if they take a chancy snapshot, it misses, you're very comfortable in poking out and taking a snapshot. You can measure roughly how much damage a shot does by either looking at your own health bar, if you're unfortunate enough to get hit by these guns, or your ally's health bar. And this can also be used to guess who's shooting you if they're undetected. You can roughly estimate how much damage their gun does and assume who it is based on the remaining tanks on the team list. That about does it for this video. It was intended to be a guide or rule set that you can use in your games to improve your chances of winning. There is a slight difference between engagement strategy and grand strategy in World of Tanks, but if you win engagements more often than not, then your win rate will benefit. If you like this video, give it a like, and if you disagree with anything I've said or believe that I've missed any key aspects, whack them in the comments below. I'm still always learning new things about this game, and I'm by no means the best at it. If you like content like this, then consider subscribing to the channel. I intend to make videos like this one for the foreseeable future. That all being said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.